There are times in life when your soul is as empty as can be, even if your mouth is praying. You pray, you say the words, but in your heart, you're cold, distracted, numb. You ask why prayer is powerless. You ask why the fellowship with God is far away. The truth hurts. Sometimes prayer is just another chore, another thing on your to-do list, another ritual you hurry through so you can get on with your day. And then when that's what it is, the very thing meant to be your source of peace is just white noise. But this is what you need to know. God never set out to make prayer a ritual without life. He meant it to be the fire that ignites your heart to life again. He meant it to be where Jesus finds you in your weakness, in your mess, in your pain, and changes you from the inside out. Prayer was never meant to be something you dash through like a morning routine. It was never intended to be crammed into a 5-second time frame before your coffee or recited in the car like a scripted speech. Prayer was intended to be living, to be breathing, to be dynamic. Prayer was intended to lift your heart, restore your vitality, and bring you into the presence of the living God. When you pray, you're not merely whispering into thin air. You're speaking to the maker of heaven and earth, the same God who put the stars up in the sky, who parted the seas, who sent his son Jesus to sojourn on this planet and redeem your life. Prayer was never meant to be small. It was meant to be fire. But so many times, what becomes of this marvelous thing, a direct link to God, pretty quietly becomes just another routine. You get up, you recite the same words, you mutter through the same phrases, and rather than being full of power, you're just running on autopilot. The risk is that when prayer becomes routine, you lose the amazement of what you're actually doing. You tend to forget that you're standing before God himself. You forget that Jesus is listening, that he's praying for you, that he's leaning in to listen to your voice. And because of this, the tendency builds where prayer no longer becomes a lifeline, but another task on the list. And when it becomes just another task, it loses its gravity in your heart. You no longer sense the spark of intimacy, the tug of connection, the guarantee of peace. Instead, it's just another box to tick off so that you can get on with your day. That's the habit which makes something sacred become something empty. It's so easy to fall into this trap because the world is boisterous. You're busy, you're juggling stuff, lugging around stress, battling through fears. Prayer may seem like one more thing you're required to do on top of everything else. So rather than slowing down, rather than involving your heart, you race. You speed read through the moment. You offer God the remnant seconds rather than the entirety of your heart. And while he still listens to you, while his love for you never wavers, what you lose is the change that prayer was meant to make. Because the thing is, prayer isn't for God, it's for you. He already knows your heart. He already knows your needs. He already knows your fears. But when you open your heart and link up with him in prayer, you are reminded who he is. You are reminded who Jesus is. You are reminded that you are not alone. Consider this. If you talked to someone you loved every day, but the conversations were superficial, repeat and hurried, the relationship would be cold. You would sense distance even as words were spoken. It's not the quantity of words that will build a strong relationship. It's the heart behind them. The same with prayer. God doesn't care about eloquent speeches. He doesn't care about eloquent words. He doesn't care about you reading something without even considering it. He cares about the true you, the broken, the weary, the joyful, the thankful, the furious, the confused. Jesus did not say, do a prayer. He said, when you pray, go to your room, shut your door, and pray to your unseen Father, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. That is not routine. That is intimacy. The practice that sucks the meaning out of prayer is one that removes intimacy and substitutes obligation. It's when you're more concerned about getting it over with rather than being. It's when you pray because you feel like you have to, rather than because you want to. And yet the amazing thing is this: God doesn't want perfection. He wants connection. Jesus didn't die on the cross to make prayer just one more burden. He laid down his life so that you would have open access to the Father, so that you might speak boldly, so that you might rest in his presence at any time, anywhere. And when you begin to view prayer as an open doorway into God's heart and not a box to check, everything changes. Suddenly, it's not something you hate or hurry. It's something you yearn for. It's the time when you feel peace amidst chaos, when you recall that you are loved, when you recall you are led. But when you continuously let it slide into habit, you will miss the miracle within. You will miss the manner in which God speaks again through his Spirit, through his word, through the quietness in your heart. Prayer was designed to fuel your faith, to ignite your courage, to quell your worry. That's why the enemy so diligently works to turn it into a dull routine. Because if he can get you to believe that prayer is boring, unnecessary, or merely obligatory, he takes away from you the power that God wants you to live in. So you need to wake yourself up. You need to pause amidst the hurrying and recall the reality. This is not a chore. This is sacred ground. When you shut your eyes, you're not entering routine. You're entering the throne room of heaven. Jesus is there. God is there. The Spirit is there. And that alone should break you out of autopilot and into wonder. And that's where the power starts anew. Autopilot prayers are among the simplest to get into because they sound good on the outside, but have nothing on the inside. You utter the right phrases, recite the familiar prayers, bow your head and mumble, but your thoughts are elsewhere. You're thinking of work, of bills, of what's next on your agenda. The words leave your lips, but your heart is not in them. And that's precisely what distances you from the presence of God. Because prayer was never about memorizing lines or marking off spiritual assignment. It was about communicating with the living God who listens to you, who cares about you, who sent his son Jesus so that you could have access to him without restrictions. When prayer becomes autopilot, it's like putting your relationship with God on mute. You're talking, but you're not really communicating. You're going through motions, but you're not really connecting. And if you're honest, sometimes it's easier to hide in routine than it is to be raw and real. But here's the thing: God doesn't want routine words that never touch your heart. He does not desire prayers that are like parables, full of words but empty of substance. He desires you. He desires your honesty, your genuineness, your authenticity. He desires the kind of discussion where you can say, God, I don't have it together. Jesus, I am lost. Lord, I need you here and now. That draws you in. That makes the door open for his Spirit to move in your life. Autopilot prayers leave you at a distance, but actual prayers bring you close. Consider how Jesus prayed. He didn't stand on the corner reciting memorized lines to appear holy. He went away to isolated areas. He bared his soul to the Father with passion, tears, and urgency. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed with such fervor that his sweat fell to the ground as drops of blood. That's not habit. That's not autopilot. That's connection. And he modeled that kind of connection so we would know what God truly desires. Not surface-level repetition, but intimacy. Not obligation, but relationship. When you fall into autopilot prayers, it's simple to deceive yourself into believing you're doing okay because you're praying daily. But if your prayers aren't inspiring your spirit, if they're not bringing you near to God, if they're not causing you to sense the presence of Jesus by your side, then you've taken something sacred and made it shallow. And God isn't looking to shame you for this. He's inviting you deeper. He's calling you back in. He's reminding you that prayer isn't about words. It's about your heart being fully engaged with him. Prayer's about relationship, not performance. Along the way, many people mix the two up. They think God is grading their prayers, like he's checking the length, the eloquence, the vocabulary, but he's not a teacher waiting to give you a grade. He's a father who misses the sound of your voice. Jesus made that plain when he said, "When you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." That verse cuts through the deceit that prayer must sound smooth. God is not impressed with performance. He's touched by presence. A relationship is not created by memorized speeches. It's created by trust, by honesty, by consistency. If you spoke to your best friend the way some people speak to prayer, saying the same exact thing with no actual thought, no actual feeling, the friendship would wither and die. It would not be alive. And God doesn't want a dead ritual with you. He sent Jesus to demolish the wall of separation so that you could approach boldly into his presence. That is no practice, no facade, no pretend, just you, broken, messy, real, thankful. The risk of performing prayer is that you begin to center on yourself rather than God. You become concerned with uttering the right words instead of being present with him. And when that occurs, prayer loses its effectiveness. But when you let go of the act, when you stop putting on the show and just begin to speak to God like you would speak to someone who loves you, it changes. That's when the burden is lifted from your shoulders. That's when you sense his peace washing over your mind. That's when you understand Jesus is nearer than you expect, listening not for eloquent words, but for a genuine heart. The reality is, prayer is the most intimate invitation you will ever get. It's the opportunity to step into the presence of the God who created you, who knows you better than you know yourself, who sent his son to save you. It's the chance to sit with him, spill your guts, and allow him to overflow his love and wisdom into you. But if you take it down to autopilot or showmanship, you're missing the entire experience. God is not holding out for you to wow him. He's holding out for you to arrive as you are. He desires your whispers when you're afraid. He desires your tears when you're burdened. He desires your smiles when you're grateful. He desires your silence when you don't even have words. That's relationship. That's what makes prayer no longer a stale routine but a lifeline of hope. And this is where the switch takes place, when you ultimately release autopilot prayers. When you begin to not practice prayer as a duty and instead practice it as conversation, you regain the potency within it. You sense God's presence again. You sense Jesus beside you. You sense the Spirit sustaining you. And suddenly prayer is no longer something you do, but is who you are. It's woven into your day, into your thinking, into your breathing. It's the anchor that keeps you grounded. It's the reminder that you are never ever alone. Because when you pray, you don't just talk, you connect with the one who holds your whole life in his hands. A moment before prayer makes all the difference. Most of the time we're busy, we've got things to do, we've got distractions pulling us in multiple directions, so we ease into prayer like it's another task on the agenda. We pop our mouths open before we've even opened our heart. But when you pause, even for a moment, actually take a breath, you make space for God in that instant. That pause isn't spent time, it's sacred space. It's where your spirit gets ahead of your mind. It's where your heart slows down long enough to understand who you're about to speak to. You're not only speaking into empty space, you're not only speaking words because that's what you do. You are speaking to the creator of the universe. You are taking your life before the one who gave it to you. And that hesitation allows you to sense the weight and the awe of that truth. When you do take that hesitation, it turns prayer into reverence instead of rote. Consider this: if you could stand before someone whom you highly respect, you wouldn't charge in with clamor. You'd catch your breath, collect your thoughts, sense the gravity of the moment. How much more should we do that with God? When Jesus prayed, he usually stepped back first. He got quiet. He hesitated before joining the dialogue with his Father. That wasn't wasted time. It was preparation for closeness. And when you hesitate, you're preparing yourself to. You're reminding your mind, this is important. God is present. And when your spirit understands that reality, your prayer feels totally different. It's like putting out a table. You don't just dump food willy-nilly. You set it up, you clear the space, you impose order. Taking a moment to pray does the same for your spirit. It sweeps away the detritus so that when you begin to speak, your heart is really prepared to encounter him. Otherwise, it's too easy to go on autopilot. With that hesitation, you enter his presence with consciousness, and the consciousness shifts your praying. Now you're not merely hurried through words. Now you are inviting God's presence into your life, and that presence is what inspires peace, clarity, and power. Jesus himself set the example. In the Gospels, we observe him drawing back, walking away, climbing up onto the mountain, being quiet. He was not hurrying to babble at God. He was drawing his heart nearer, positioning his spirit. And if the Son of God required his moment of silent withdrawal before praying, how much more do we? That moment isn't a matter of delay. It's a matter of depth. It's a matter of coming into prayer prepared to receive, not merely prepared to recite. Raw, simple prayers are stronger than perfect ones. At some point, humans began to think that the more complex your prayer is, the more spiritual it is. They believe they must have poetic words, grand sentences, or religious vocabulary. But that is not what penetrates the heart of God. What touches him is sincerity. What moves him is genuineness. What he wants is your genuine voice, not your practiced one. When Jesus was teaching the disciples how to pray, he taught them a prayer that was brief, concise, straightforward. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Not a lot of extraneous words, not a lot of performance, just reality. The authority of prayer has nothing to do with how well you say it. It has everything to do with who you're praying to. God isn't interested in being impressed. He's interested in your being real. If you hurt, say that. If you're mad, acknowledge it. If you're grateful, yell it. If you're confused, admit it. You don't need to sugarcoat your words for Jesus. He already sees what's in your heart. The mere fact of being honest with him is what opens the relationship. Faking never develops closeness, but openness always does. Consider the prayers of the Bible. They weren't all eloquent. David screamed out, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever?" That's not sophisticated, that's urgent sincerity. The tax collector in Jesus' parable just pounded his chest and prayed, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." That wasn't practiced, it was honest. And Jesus declared that man's prayer was answered. Because God is not looking for perfection, he's looking for truth. When you let it drop and reduce your prayers to what's actually in you, something changes. The tension loosens. You no longer attempt to perform, and you begin to truly connect. You begin to feel the presence of God because you're no longer covering with empty words. You begin to feel Jesus near, listening, consoling, leading. That's the type of prayer that produces breakthrough. Not the practiced speech, but the belly-deep cry. Not the eloquent sentence, but the raw honesty. And sometimes the most effective prayer you can offer is a single word, help. Sometimes it's merely thank you. Sometimes it's Jesus, I need you. And that suffices. For what is key is not the duration of the prayer, but the sincerity in it. And God takes pleasure in a heart that is sincere before him. If you wait until you know everything, and then you proceed in prayer with raw honesty, you make space for God to meet you in a tangible way. You make room for his spirit to engage. You make space for his peace to envelop you. You give him space to work on your circumstance. And it's in that simplicity that prayer is revived again. Not a duty, not a chore, not a task on the list, but a lifeline, a place of connection. A sacred moment where your humanity meets his divinity. And that's the invitation every time you pray. Don't hurry, don't practice, just stop and be genuine. God's not expecting perfect, he's expecting you. Jesus is not far away, he's close. The Spirit's not quiet, he's eager to speak. And the instant you move into prayer with that in mind, everything starts to change. Prayer is supposed to fill you up, not drain you. Somewhere along the line, many of us began treating prayer as if it were a chore, like one more thing we're expected to mark off the list. Prayer was never meant to be burdensome. It was never meant to leave you feeling heavy. Prayer was meant to lift you up, to lighten your load, to replenish your spirit with peace and power. When Jesus told us, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," he was indicating what prayer is actually all about. It's not adding pressure any more pressure. It's putting down the pressure. It's about relieving your soul before God. If prayer is exhausting, it's not because God made it that way. It's because along the way, how you are doing it, the priority has changed. Consider this: if you view prayer as a performance, naturally it is going to exhaust you. If you believe you must use the right words, the right formula, or the right tone to catch God's attention, then prayer is going to feel more like an exam you must pass. That will zap you, not fill you up. But if you keep in mind that prayer is a dialogue with your daddy, the pressure just melts away. God knows ahead of time what you require before you utter a word. He already has a vision of your heart, your suffering, your joy. Prayer isn't about enlightening him, it's about intimacy. And intimacy fills, relationship fills, truthfulness fills. That's why prayer is a source of power, not weakness. Jesus taught us this. After days of ministry, he didn't view prayer as one more thing on his agenda. He viewed it as the means of reviving his soul. The Bible says he frequently pulled away to deserted places and prayed. Why? Because prayer rejuvenated him. It wasn't draining, it was life-giving. When you enter prayer with a burdened heart, you don't depart with more weight. You walk away lighter because you've turned it over to the God who's better equipped to carry it than you. That's what prayer was always meant to accomplish: lift the burden off of your shoulders onto his. And yet countless numbers of us pray in a manner that leaves us lighter in fatigue. We recite the words without activating the heart. We mouth the words without stopping to sense the presence of God. We use it as a ritual rather than a refuge. No wonder it feels so hollow at times. But not because God is aloof. It's because we're drawing near to him like he's a duty, not a father. When you change your mindset, when you come to prayer not as a performance but as a position of surrender, something shifts. It fills you because you're not attempting to control everything anymore. You're finally letting go, and God moves in to make you stronger. It's like walking around all day with a heavy backpack. If someone says they will carry it for you, and you continue to hold on to it, naturally you'll remain drained. But if you let go and give it to them, your body becomes lighter. That's what occurs in prayer. When you really let go of your burdens to Jesus, he takes them, and your soul is at peace. That is why prayer must never leave you exhausted. If it does, then it is time to quit and ask, am I really surrendering? Or am I simply reading? Am I really opening my heart? Or am I merely performing the actions? The distinction between those two is the distinction between depletion and renewal. Shattering the routine habit revives closeness to God. This is the essence of how prayer can feel alive or dead. When it becomes something routine and not the only thing you're saying to God, you miss the intimacy. And God never desired prayer to be a stale habit. He desired it to be the most intimate aspect of your union with him. Think about communicating with someone you love dearly, but saying nothing but memorized lines day after day. That kind of relationship would be hollow, don't you think? That's what occurs when prayer becomes habitual without passion. Spiritual closeness with God occurs when you bring who you really are into the interaction. Jesus didn't die and resurrect so you might have a shallow, robotic relationship with God. He sacrificed his life to demolish every obstacle so that you might approach God boldly into his presence with confidence, speaking to him as a father. When prayer is reduced to formality, that closeness is cut off. But when you wake yourself up and choose to be present, to bring your sincere heart, intimacy surges back. Remember when prayer came alive for you? I bet it wasn't when you had the right words, it was when you were actual. Perhaps you were broken and wept with tears. Perhaps you were grateful and your heart spilled over. Perhaps you were lost and said so freely. These are moments where intimacy with God begins, not in repetition, but in reality. That's what shatters routine wide open. When you decide to view prayer as a sacred moment, not a mindless routine, you begin to feel his presence once more. You catch his whisper through scripture, through his spirit, through stillness. That's intimacy, that's relationship, and that restores your soul. The risk is not in praying frequently, it's praying without presence, because prayer is not about saying the right amount of words, it's about being completely there with God. Jesus warned against this when he told us not to pray the way the pagans do, who babble on hoping their long words will be heard. He wasn't rejecting long prayers, he was rejecting empty ones. He was referencing us back to closeness. He was saying, don't merely repeat, don't merely babble, don't merely make prayer dull. Go to God the way a child goes to a father, in trust, in honesty, with heart. That's where the energy lies. When routine is shattered, intimacy is reestablished. And when intimacy is reestablished, prayer is no longer a chore and begins to be a treasure. It no longer depletes you and instead fills you. It no longer becomes something you avoid and begins to become something you seek. Because your soul, deep down, desires to connect with your Creator. And prayer is where that desire is fulfilled. God is not interested in your routine. He is pursuing your heart. Jesus is not tuning in for perfect form. He's tuning in for your voice. And the Holy Spirit is not flowing in scripted words. He's flowing in the raw vulnerability of an open heart. And when you approach prayer in that way, when you allow it to fill you rather than drain you, when you break the habit of routine and lean into intimacy, you'll find what prayer was always intended to be, not a task, not an obligation, but the very breath of your soul. Prayer has the ability to change your day, your heart, and your life's whole perspective, but only if you enter into it with awareness and honesty. If you let prayer become just one more line on your to-do list, it doesn't have the ability to change you. But when you come at it with presence, it can rewire your mind, change the way you feel, and renew the way you perceive your world. Prayer isn't about checking a religious box. It's about engaging with the living God, the one who spoke the universe into being and still takes care of the tiniest details of your existence. It's about stepping into a moment with Jesus, where you allow him to meet you exactly where you are, mess and all, and invite him to bring life to the areas of you that feel weighed down, fatigued, or burdened. That's the distinction between prayer as task and prayer as transformation. Prayer as task will always become a chore. You'll get through it distracted, half-hearted, and halfway through, nothing in you will feel any different. But prayer as transformation is not dead. It's the breath that turns everything around. It's the moment when you find yourself spinning with fear, and instead of allowing the fear to ravage you, you open your lips and declare, God, I need you. Jesus, take this from me. And that one action transforms your whole state of being. Suddenly your shoulders slump, your mind slows, and you sense a peace that doesn't even make sense to you, but you know it's real because it did not come from you. That is the peace of God that Scripture says exceeds all understanding. When you allow prayer to change you, it's no longer about surviving the words, it's about allowing the words to penetrate your heart. It's not about performing for God anymore, it's about being truthful with Him. You no longer worry about whether what you say sounds good enough, and you simply chat to Him as your Father, and a beautiful thing happens in that place. You begin to feel known, noticed, loved. Because the real thing is that God isn't waiting for you to try and impress Him with eloquence. He's waiting for you to trust Him enough to be authentic. When Jesus prayed, it was never about performance. It was about becoming intimate with His Father. And that's the model He left us, to come as we are, to be honest with our pain, to yield our will, and to allow God's presence to transform us inside out. Consider the disciples when they asked Jesus to teach them to pray. They didn't ask because they wanted to have a ritual, to memorize. They asked because they observed how prayer changed Him. They noticed how He departed exhausted and returned with power. They noticed how He had authority, how He had peace, how He had strength that wasn't human. That's what prayer does. It makes you into someone who can bear what you couldn't bear by yourself. And the same Jesus who was here teaching them to pray is the same Jesus who is here today, listening to you, ready to meet you where you're at, ready to renew your spirit when you are willing to open your heart. This is the reason prayer isn't a luxury if you desire a life of peace and power. It is the lifeline. It's where your mind is refreshed. Each time you pray, you are conditioning your heart to look to God rather than face inward on your fears. Each time you pray, you are deciding to have faith that Jesus is larger than the storm that looms before you. With every prayer, you are taking the burden of life off your own shoulders and putting it into the hands of the one who has already borne the cross for you. That is not a habit, that is change. And when you are living with that mindset, prayer isn't something you fit into moments in your day. It is the environment of your life, It becomes the reflex that springs up in you whenever you feel stressed, frightened, or blown about. It becomes the heart habit of whispering, God, I trust you, rather than panicking. That's when you know prayer is operating, not when you've done your minutes, but when you find yourself adjusting in the moment, leaning on God rather than breaking under the load. Change in prayer isn't always that you see things around you get changed right away. Sometimes what gets changed first is you. The circumstance might stay the same, but now you can stand before it, you can walk through it because you have the wisdom, the strength, the peace to endure it, and the faith to know that God is still in charge. That's what Jesus does when you let him come into your prayer. He does not always move the mountain right away, but he always moves within you so you are no longer pinned beneath its weight. That is transformation. That's the miracle that lies within what may appear to be mundane prayer. And this is where the deeper truth is revealed. Prayer aligns you with God's will. You begin to perceive life no longer through your own limited eyes, but through his. Jesus demonstrated this as he prayed, not my will, but yours be done. That one releasing changed the entire narrative of mankind, and each time you repeat that prayer in your own life, renewal occurs. Your hold relaxes, your fear diminishes, your faith increases, and you begin to bear the kind of peace and authority that comes only from living with God. Prayer is transformation, is about letting God disrupt your routines. It's about letting him yank you out of your worry circles, your negativity spirals, your self-sabotaging thoughts, and instead speak his truth into your brain. It's about letting his spirit breathe into the areas where you've become numb. It's about letting Jesus remind you that you're not alone, that you're loved, that you're held. That's not something to check off on a list. That's the very thing that gets your soul breathing again. God did not give you prayer so you could create another task for your day. He gave you prayer so you could leave your burdens at his feet. Jesus didn't instruct you to pray because he needed to hear your voice. Jesus instructed you to pray because he knew you needed to hear. That's the change of prayer, not merely that it alters what you say, but that it alters whom you are while you speak. When prayer is alive, when it's real, when it's surrendered, it's the pivot of your day, your week, your life. That's where the burden lifts, the fear shatters, and the presence of God fills you in a way that nothing else can. And that's the gift God always meant prayer to be, not another chore on your to-do list, but the place where you are remolded by his love, his power, and his peace in Jesus Christ. Prayer isn't about scripted words or perfect rituals. It's about presence. It's about moving from hollow repetition to actual connection. It's about opening your heart and saying, God, I can't walk this out without you. Jesus, I need you. That's the difference between assignment and when prayer gets real, peace invades panic. Strength emerges where weakness once resided. Fear starts to lose its hold, and you find that you don't merely pray to check a box, you pray because it's the only way to breathe again. This is the invitation today. Stop making prayer a chore and begin making it your lifeline. Stop hurrying through words and begin allowing them to settle in your soul. Because every time you slow down, every time you yield, every time you say his name, and when God appears, all else falls away. Don't let prayer die as a routine. Let it live as the place where God restores you, where Jesus strengthens you, where peace and power return. Prayer is not a task, it is the turning point of your life.